So my name is Jesse Hull. I'm the Executive Director of Technology at GSN Social. We're one of the top game developers on the Facebook platform, serving approximately 2 million unique users every day. And I'm going to be talking to you about a holistic approach to A/B testing. So there's two ways to start a company. You can just have a great idea and just drive it until it succeeds. Or you can find people you just love working with and just try every crazy thing you can think of until you find stuff that really starts to resonate with users. So about 5 years ago, some friends and I started a company. And we took the latter approach. For 2 years, we tried every crazy thing we could think of. And here are the results. Pretty unimpressive. So after about 2 years of this, we took a step back and we said, okay, from now on, everything we do, we're going to try to measure what is its effect on users. Every feature we build, we're going to test. So we understand which features are really connecting with users and which features just aren't working at all. And here are the results of that. For the next 2 years, our app grew continuously. And that's really unheard of on the Facebook platform. Typically, ads spike up and then die down. Our app steadily grew for 2.5 years. And I really attribute that to two things: testing everything we did, and continuing to work with really great people. So what is A/B testing? Well, at its very simplest, you randomly assign users to group A or B, and that random assignment is very important. If you don't do that randomly, your numbers will be completely biased. And then you show those users different content. So in this case, we're showing one user an ugly snapping turtle and another user a cute cuddly kitten. And then you measure the result. And measuring the result can mean lots of different things. You can measure how likely are users to pay you, how likely are they to share your game or your application with their friends, how likely are they to return to your application. Or it could be just something as simple as, how do they rate you in a survey after they've played the game. So something you often hear about A/B testing. A/B testing is like sandpaper. You can use it to smooth out the details, but you can't actually create anything with it. So this is wrong. Well, it's half wrong. It's true that you can't create anything with it, but you can do a lot more than smooth out the details. But you have to be doing, drum roll please, holistic A/B testing. So what is that? So the first principle is you really want everyone in your organization testing. And the reason for that is that often in organizations, it's really just the geeks of the organization that are doing testing. And that's fine, and you want them doing it. But the thing about that is that they gravitate towards looking at statistical significance and numbers, and testing does involve that. But if the geeks are doing the testing, the set of tests you can come up with can be pretty limited. It really does feel like you're just smoothing out the details. Now, you should absolutely do these tests. They make meaningful impact in your business. 2% more revenue is very respectable. But you really want people to think bigger and more broadly. You want creative people in your organization thinking about testing too. Bonus points if you can figure out who all those people are. And that kind of leads to the second principle of holistic A/B testing. You need to test big and small ideas. So why do you need to test small ideas? Well, if you have 10 ideas that each improve revenue by 4%, you increase your business by 50%. That's a very significant improvement in your business. And the reason it's not just 4 times 10 is these ideas compound. That last idea gives you more effect than the first one. Well, so if I can improve my business by 50% with just small ideas, why do I need to test big ideas? I'm going to use a metaphor here. I'm a rock climber, and when you're climbing, you're kind of moving up the rock, slowly shifting your weight over, getting a little bit higher up, maybe then shifting your weight back, getting a little bit higher. I view those moves as those little tests, those small ideas. But the problem is, eventually you get to the top of the rock, and there really isn't anywhere to go. So you need to test big ideas to find those mountains far away that can totally transform your business, bring in all new kinds of products, and really change the game. And you need to be testing both these things. So I'm going to give you an example of how we did this at GSN. So we had some luck in casino games. And by casino games, these are games where The user isn't betting real money. We're giving them free tokens every day. They can play with those tokens in games like slot machines. And then if they run out of tokens, they can buy more, or they can just come back to the next day to get more free tokens. So the first thing is we really encouraged our game designer to test wildly different ideas. We had a lot of luck in the slot space, but we wanted to try other game mechanics and see which ones really resonated with our users. So we tested a scratch card game, and this is the game you would find at 7-Eleven. We tested a roulette game. We tested a single-player video bingo game. And we tested a blackjack game. Now, it's important to note, we tried to build these games relatively quickly. We just wanted to get something out there to see what resonated with our users. These weren't incredibly polished. These weren't perfect games. We just wanted something to try some stuff out. I actually thought blackjack was going to absolutely win this test. I played a lot of blackjack in college. I just thought our users were going to love it. It was actually the best done of all the games. Well, it turns out I was completely wrong. And I mean, not just a little wrong, really, really wrong. I mean, our users absolutely resonated with this game. Way more time spent playing, way more likely to return, and way more revenue. So what did we do from there? Well, now we found a mountain. We found one of those opportunities, and now we want to climb that mountain, see how high it goes, see what's there. Because this was our just first take at it. We knew we could do a lot better. So the first thing is we had engineers improve the load time. And we actually tested this. And I'll talk more why you need to test things like that later, but we tested it, and it made a real difference. We had artists do a completely new UI. And again, it made a considerable difference to the bottom line. This is another thing. We had a developer actually test some various features to the game. So I know I said earlier in the talk that sometimes the engineers aren't that creative. In our organization, we really encourage everyone in the organization to come up with ideas and try out those ideas. So in this case, it was actually the engineer coming up with ideas. And he came up with a whole bunch of different new monetization vehicles in the game, a bunch of power-ups. This is one that worked pretty well at letting people buy more balls at the end of the game. This one just kind of blows my mind. So we actually charged people real money, like real Facebook credits, to choose which numbers they could put on their bingo card. And when I think about that, the mathematician in me is like, that's crazy. Why would you pay money to choose the numbers on your bingo card? Like, it doesn't change your odds of winning in any way. But users just have numbers they love and they want them on their bingo card. And it, made a nice impact on revenue. So the combination of all these little tests improved our revenue by almost 25% in this game. And even probably more importantly, the next day return rate was unchanged. So even though we were offering new ways for users to pay us, it didn't make the game any less fun for the users who weren't paying us. So how do you build an organization that can do this? How do you build an organization where everything is being tested and you're really using analytics throughout the organization? So there's 2 steps here. This talk has been trimmed down a little bit. There used to be 4, but you guys are only going to get 2. You can ask me what the other 2 steps are later. So the first thing is build a framework everyone can use. You really want everyone in your organization understanding how to do these things and understanding how to interpret the results. So what does that look like? Well, you need great ideas. There's really no substitute for great ideas. People often talk about there's this dichotomy between creativity and analytics. And I think that's just silly. You need great ideas, and then you need to see how well those great ideas do by testing them. So you take those ideas and you put them into a common testing infrastructure. And what does that mean? There are a lot of tools that third parties provide and that we've built internally to help with this. But I really think the most important thing is not actually the tooling. It's agreeing across the organization, what are the metrics that you really care about? What are the metrics you're trying to optimize? And these metrics have to be really intuitive things. They have to be about people. Because after all, that's who's playing these games. It's people. So they have to be metrics that everyone in the organization can understand. So very simple things like, how much money did this group give us? How likely are this group to share the application with their friends? How likely are they to come back the next day? They have to be metrics that everyone in your organization can wrap their head around and install and be very intuitive. So you run your test, you measure it by these metrics, and you see what the results are. And I'm sorry to say that most of the time, it's going to go in the trash can. And this is actually a really, really good thing. We actually target for 80% of our ideas to fail. And you're saying, well, why do you want 80% of your ideas to fail? Because if 90% of your ideas are succeeding, that means one of two things. Either you're not really testing, so you're just kind of rubber stamping your results, you're not really looking at the metrics and trying to understand what's happening, or you're not pushing yourself enough. You're not trying big enough ideas. All your ideas are small and they're all just succeeding a little bit. You really want to try big enough, crazy enough ideas that a lot of them get thrown away. But occasionally, and I think my hit rate is more like 10%, but we try 20% for the company. Occasionally you find an idea that you can keep. And that's just awesome, because when you've actually found a good idea, then you know you learned something. And then you try variations of that idea. So that kind of loop there, that represents you learning about your users. That represents you understanding what your users are doing and how they like your game. So the second key to build an organization is really build it into your culture. And I think the first step in that is you really kind of need high-level buy-in that analytics and measuring is part of the culture. And the founders of what was Mesmo learned that the hard way. We spent 2 years not testing, and we learned that just didn't work. So it really is part of our culture. But I think there are ways you can infuse it even if you don't have that buy-in. So one thing is really try to set goals of teams in terms of tests. So here's an example of perform 10 tests and improving daily active users. The combination of those tests should improve revenue, improve daily active users by 20%. So what does that do? The thing I like about this is you're saying we want you to build stuff. You have to build 10 tests. But they don't all have to succeed. You only need 1 or 2 tests to really succeed to move that needle. So that gives people the freedom to try different things. Not everything has to succeed, but we do want you to produce things. And then everyone in your organization is testing. So game designers, we encourage them to test all kinds of different things. So here they're testing undersea slots. This is a slot game. This is a bubble shooter game. We test solitaire games. We test tower defense games. We're really trying to see which games resonate with our audience. We test various branded games to see which ones, again, really our audience loves. And it's important to know we try to build those games quickly to see which ones are resonating with users. And then if we find one we like, we double down and build it more. We want our artist testing. So of course, everyone knows on Facebook, your feed images, the images for ads, those kind of external places where your application touches Facebook are really important. And we want our artists to have sort of hands-on feedback about how those images are doing. How often are people clicking? How often are people installing? How often do people publish this image? Do they really like that image and want to share it with their friends? So, as I said before, engineers are the ones that are sort of most likely to jump on testing. But we really encourage our engineers to test sort of non-standard things, like performance improvements. So I mentioned that earlier, that we tested that. So why do you need to test performance improvements? Well, the reason is it gives you a business case for making performance improvements to your application or your game. If you can prove that making sure your web pages load in under 200 milliseconds makes a meaningful difference to your business, and you know exactly how much meaningful difference it makes, then you can say, well, maybe I'm not going to build this new feature, and we're going to spend a couple weeks really working on performance, because we know that will make a bottom line difference to our business. Another great thing to test is architectural changes. Does this new architecture allow me to build things faster? And really try it. And maybe there's some extra work there, but I think you learn a lot about the new architecture by trying it against the old one. The days of doing marketing by kind of intuition are really long gone, and this shouldn't surprise anyone. But really test your assumptions, test what's working. Maybe don't send emails to half your user base and see, do they come back more or less? It might be that you might surprise yourself and realize, wow, these users are coming back more. So even though I'm sending emails every week and they're getting clicked on, it's actually annoying more users than it's helping. That's really the power of testing. Cross promotions are another great thing. You should really measure what's happening with your cross promos. You should measure what users are leaving your application. How many users do you just lose because that cross promo bar is there? And then how many do you get, and how valuable are those users to get? You really want to be able to track at that granularity so you can make a fair decision. Well, I give up this many users, that costs me this amount of revenue, and I get this many, and I get that much revenue, and you can balance, was it a net win for me? So a question I often get asked is, how do you decide what to test? So I'm copping out on this a little bit. You really have to hire great people. You need awesome, creative ideas. There's no substitute for that. But the beauty is, if you hire great people, you can improve their intuition by testing. So, we've been developing on the Facebook platform for 5 years, and I feel like at this point I have some intuition about what works and what doesn't, but that was hard-earned. It was from running literally hundreds of tests, maybe even thousands at this point, and really understanding what things work and what don't. So testing is the driver for your creativity. It tells you what your users really love and gives you fodder for new ideas. So the other thing is, well, when shouldn't you test? So I think this is a really good example of a time you probably shouldn't A/B test. But more seriously, so sometimes it's hard to test when you have technological limitations. An example for us of this is we'd like to test different names for our Facebook application. But Facebook doesn't let you do that. So we can change the name of our application and then kind of look before and after. But that doesn't give you exactly the clean results you want. So in this case, you do the best you can, and you just move on. Another, I think, excuse people give for not testing is they have no users. I mean, to me, this is basically just a cop-out. These days, a couple $100, you can buy a couple 100 users, and that's more than enough to do some simple testing. Now, you're certainly not going to be able to measure monetization with a couple 100 users, because typically games are monetizing at 1% to 2% of their user base. But you can certainly tell how many users get through your initial funnel. You can certainly get statistical significance on how many users come back the next day. And it really doesn't cost that much. So you can learn a lot with very little investment in just buying users. This is another thing that it's very hard to A/B test, is long-term effects. But I think you can even crack this nut. So, for example, let's say you want to improve kind of your 6 months or 1 year retention, right? Running an A/B test for 6 months or a year is a little bit crazy. We almost never run tests for longer than a month, and usually they're over in a couple days or a week. But I think you can even get at these long-term effects through testing. So, for example, let's say you're losing a lot of users at month 5. So the feature you could test is just launch a new feature to everyone in your user base who's been around for 5 months and see if that feature gets them to stay around 1 more month. So you can run that test in a month, and that might help get at some of these long-term effects. Now, you can't get everything this way, but you try as much as you can to really get data. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk, it's that everyone in your organization should be testing all the time, because the impact of your testing is limited only by the breadth and creativity of the ideas that you test. So the company that I started with some friends of mine 5 years ago now was acquired by GSN about 1.5 years ago. And it's still the same great culture where we try all kinds of crazy things, and we have great people around doing all kinds of wacky things. But now we just operate at awesome scale. I mean, we touch 2 million users every day, and an idea you have can be in front of those users in weeks, days, sometimes even hours, and that's just awesome. So if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me on email, and we're definitely hiring. And I wanted to leave you with one final thought, that a lot of this stuff isn't new. So this is a quote by Buddha. Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Over there.
So you mentioned having the organization distribute sort of the buy-in, the implementation of A/B testing, and to create a common process. Do you sort of manage that with a central responsible person to implement, or does everybody implement as they are engaged in the process?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it is there sort of one person that's implementing all this testing, or is it sort of throughout the organization? And there are some central tools that everyone's working on, that a core team works on, but the people who are implementing the test, are focused on some aspect of the product, and they're responsible for implementing that test, and they just kind of plug into this infrastructure we have. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thanks. Right there, and there it is.
With so much A/B testing going on, how do you guys limit the cause and effect of different tests happening on the same individual?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question is, with multiple tests going on, how do we prevent them from kind of affecting each other? And the answer is we sometimes screw this up. But what we try to do is make sure that we're not sort of testing around the same area of the UI at the same time. But we can certainly be running lots of simultaneous tests on different parts of the UI or different parts of a game or different places in the application. So, and that there is some chance that two unrelated parts of the application will create some weird synergistic effect, but we think that's pretty unlikely. As long as you're testing in sort of separate areas of the UI, we feel like things like that are pretty unlikely to happen. Right there in the blue and white shirt.
How do you guys deal with the impact in terms of CR when you make a gameplay change that you A/B test that you find isn't completely positive towards like revenue, but then you take away and users are responding that they like that feature and it doesn't work out for the company as a whole?
Yeah, so the question is, what if we test the feature and kind of users like it, but when we look at the metrics, it doesn't help. So I mean, when deciding what things to keep and what things to not is often a tough situation. Sometimes you'll have one metric improves and another metric declines, and you really have to ask yourself, if I'm losing retention but gaining revenue, is that something I want to do right now? Am I trying to drive up my numbers for this quarter, or do I really want to keep this user on the long haul? If I want to keep them on the long haul, I'm going to favor towards retention. And I think the thing you're implying is, what about if you look at your boards and some people like this feature, but then you look at their metrics and it doesn't really work out? Well, if it doesn't hurt your metrics, I would probably keep it. If it does hurt your metrics, you kind of have to bite the bullet and take it away. Sometimes users also complain, oh, my friend has this feature and I don't. And, generally our response to that is, oh, we're trying out lots of things. You'll see some cool new features soon if it works out. And users are, in our experience, pretty accepting of that. Right there in the middle.
Just curious on your shift in culture from not testing to testing.
Yeah.
Would you say, the biggest hurdle that you faced as you did that?
Well, fortunately, at that point, we were a pretty small team. There was only 4 of us, so it was a lot easier. I mean, I think our biggest challenge was really trying to understand, well, what are the metrics we need to measure? And then there's always some technical stuff about, we needed to educate ourselves about things like statistical significance and all this stuff. And I think a lot of that is much more fleshed out these days. It's pretty easy to do that, but we didn't know anything about that at the time. So it took us a little while to get up to speed, but I think there are tools and stuff out there that can help that a lot these days. Right there in the back.
Typical sample sizes for when you're running your tests.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it depends a lot on what you're trying to measure. So if you're trying to look at a funnel and see how many users make it through our funnel, thousands of users are plenty to get statistical significance on that. But if we're trying to measure revenue, it's a lot harder, right? Because revenue, generally, as I said, 1% to 2% of the users pay, and you get huge variability in the amount they pay. So some users will pay 10, 100, 1,000x what other users will pay. So when you're really trying to get statistical significance on revenue results, you need to run things a lot longer. But there are some standard mathematical techniques that kind of give you can estimate how long you need to run a test based on kind of what is the standard deviation of the thing you're trying to measure. Okay, no other questions? Oop, over there, sorry.
What were the other 2 principles that you
oh geez, I shouldn't have mentioned that because I knew you were going to ask. So I touched on one, which was really, you build a common infrastructure, and I think this probably deserves being called out as the second one, but really having easy to understand metrics throughout the organization. And then I think the other one that I sort of called out explicitly was, really getting management buy-in to those throughout the organization, just so it's not an uphill battle. Is there another one over there? Right there?
Do you also use surveys to get a little more direct feedback by asking users?
We do. We do usertesting.com, which is a great service so you can actually kind of see what users are doing. And that feedback, I think A/B testing gives you the kind of what, like, oh, something's wrong here, or we're losing something. At this point in the funnel, like, people are dropping off, but you don't really get the why from testing. So really kind of watching user behavior is great for that. And we absolutely do surveys, especially when we're doing like game prototypes. We'll kind of, here's a very basic game mechanic. Do you find this mechanic fun? And we'll do surveys and then compare, 10 prototypes and see which one did the best in the surveys. So we absolutely do that. Okay, with that, thank you very much.